Is it potato planting season or is it too early? Should you sprout your seed potatoes? I'll be going over everything you need to grow a great potato crop this season. One of the biggest potato growing questions is, should you sprout your potatoes? It's also known as chitting. For a home gardener, it's a really good idea. This really maximizes your yields and gets you off to a really good start. Seed potatoes should be sprouted as soon as you get them because it can take up to 4 weeks for them to sprout. You can lay them out in a cardboard box or even an egg carton works really well. You want to place these where they get plenty of light to encourage that sprouting process. But keep them cool. 50 degrees is about the best temperature for this. Just wherever you put them, make sure that they're not going to freeze because this can damage them. The light encourages a thick, stumpy green sprout, which is a healthier sprout, and that's what we want. If you've ever seen sprouted potatoes like in a pantry or a root cellar that get those long sprouts, they're just reaching for sunlight, and they're never going to be a good producing potato start. If you got your potatoes and they've already sprouted and they have these little white sprouts because they've been in a bag and they haven't had that light, we'll want to put these in light so that they can green up. And this really only takes a couple of days. We want them to turn green before we plant them because this will create a healthier potato start. Each potato is full of energy. It has everything that these sprout needs to get off to a good start. The potato is just a source for water and nutrients, and each one of these sprouts will become a plant. Each potato has a sprouting end and a rose end. The rose end is down here where it was attached to the mother plant. This is where it was severed. And up here is where all the little eyes are at. And this is where our sprouts are going to come out from. Is more eyes or sprouts on a seed potato a good thing? Well, that all depends. If you're growing smaller potatoes like fingerlings or some of the other varieties that are really small, then the more eyes the better. More eyes just means more sprouts and more plants. But if you're wanting to grow big potatoes, then you really only want 1 or 2 sprouts per potato. And so what you need to do is you'll have to remove all of the extra sprouts on these. So I like to take the 2 biggest sprouts and then I'll take a melon baller and I'll just basically cut these right on out. You can use a knife as well. And that way that leaves 2 really nice eyes. You want to have this heal over for a couple of days so you don't have those wet spots. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. So what's the perfect size of a seed potato? Well, one that can fit in your hand, almost like an egg size, is the perfect size for that. Anything bigger than that, then we're going to want to be cutting it, maybe in quarters or in halves. Just make sure that when we cut it, that it has at least 2 eyes. When you have a little bit larger potato like this, then this can definitely be cut in half, no problem. We just want to make sure that we have at least 1 to 2 eyes per side. This one I wouldn't cut into quarters because there's really not enough eyes on this one. So when we cut it, we want to make sure that we lay it open so that cut edge can dry, basically heal or create a scab. Because if it doesn't and we plant it when it's wet, then it can just rot in that soil. Also, by having it heal over and having that scab on it, then the wireworms can't get into it as easy, which can be a problem in some areas. Potatoes belong to the Solanaceae family. This is like our potatoes, our tomatoes, our peppers, and our eggplants. These are all warm season crops. So if we planted them too early and they came up and we got hit by a frost, then that's going to knock them down. Sometimes they recover, but that really sets them back. So there's no reason to plant them too early. I like to plant mine 2 weeks before our last average frost. Every year I order a lot of seed potatoes for our farm store. This year when they got shipped, they got delayed on a truck somewhere in a storm, and by the time I got them, they were frozen solid and they weren't any good. I didn't have any even for my garden, but I had a customer that knew about this and she wasn't going to plant her seed potatoes and she gave me all of hers. Thanks, Carol. I really appreciate it. Potatoes really like to grow in full sun, and they like well-amended beds with lots of compost or well-rotted steer manure. They really like that loose soil because they are a tuber, they grow underground. So the looser, the easier it is for them to grow. So amend your soil with a lot of compost because by amending with organic matter will really pay off in the long run. Potatoes prefer acidic soils. So if you live in an area where your soil's alkali like us, then you can add some cottonseed meal or some acid mix and just mix this in when you're amending your soil. But if you live in an area where your soil's already acidic, then just use a well-balanced all-purpose fertilizer. A good spacing for your potatoes is 12 inches apart. And when we plant them, we want the rows end down and the sprouts up. So go deeper in the south where it's hot and go shallower in the north where it's cool. So the depth of the potato can be anywhere from 2 inches to 6 inches deep, depending on where you live. Once your potatoes are about 4 to 6 inches tall, then you can start mounding. And what this does is it helps keep that soil cool, which is good for those potatoes. Plus, if you have any of your potatoes that are kind of popping up out of the soil, it keeps them from being exposed from the sun and turning green and bitter. Some good choices to mound up around your potato are compost, a soil conditioner, or even a straw. You just want to make sure that you're leaving a few leaves exposed when you're mounding. Foliar feed your potatoes 3 to 4 times during the growing season with a liquid kelp and liquid fish fertilizer. Foliar feeding is just spraying a liquid diluted fertilizer right on the foliage of those potato plants. When your plants start to develop flowers, you can start to harvest some new potatoes. These are those really small, delicious, and tender potatoes. But these will have to be used immediately because they don't have the starches developed in them yet, and so they won't keep. Then, once the plants die back, you can harvest those main crop of potatoes about 2 weeks later. That's when the potatoes will develop a hard skin. It's time to sprout those potatoes, get them planted, and I'll see you in our next episode.